Hello everyone, my name is Sabrina Khairunnisa. So I would like to explain the materials about the modernism age that start from 1920 until 1945. So these are the points that I will discuss. First, the introduction. Second, the characteristic, the literature, and the famous authors in this era. First, introduction. Modernism era that start from 1920 until 1945. The end of the Victorian era is the beginning of modern age. The first half of the 20th century is very important in the history of English literature. This era marked by a strong and intentional break with tradition. This break includes a strong reaction against established religious, political, and social views. Belief that the world is created in the act of perceiving it. Next, the characteristic of this era. There are some characteristics of the modernism era. First, interrogation and anxiety. The 20th century is known as the age of interrogation and anxiety. In this century, the scientific revolution shook men's faith in the authority of religion and church. The social, moral, political, and economic scenario was changing fast. People were not ready to accept anything without testing it on the touchstone of reason. Modern industrial and technical progress gave birth to the spirit of competition, and it increased frustration, anxiety, and cynicism. The literature of this period reflects all these tendencies. Next, art for life's sake. In the modern age, the doctrine of art for art's sake was rejected. The doctrine of art for life's sake was established. Next, growing interest in the poor and the working classes. The beginning of the 20th century marked the end of the supremacy of the middle classes. The poor were no more helpless creatures, and they posed a great challenge to the social conscience. Thus, this age showed the growing interest of people in the poor and the working classes. Next, impact of socio-economic condition on literature. The economic and social change influenced the 20th century literature. The rapid industrial development changed social and economic scenario. The land aristocracy and agricultural labor were in great trouble. Young villagers began to migrate to industrial towns, and there was complete breakup of rural way of life. The urbanization changed the pattern of social relationship, and money became a key factor in all human relationships. Economists raised their voice against poverty. The changed pattern of social behavior influenced literature, and Marxism and socialism come into existence, and they influenced the authors of the period. Next, psychology and literature. In the modern age, new psychological researches influenced literature. Freudian theory became very popular. The rational view of sex relationship was evolved. The H. Lawrence and Virginia Woolf and many others were influenced by new researches in psychology and sex. Next, the impact of two world wars. We can notice the impact of two world wars on literature of modern age. After the First World War, depression, want, and unemployment increased. The League of Nations was set up to establish world peace. In spite of this attempt, the Second World War broke out. England also suffered a great loss. After that, a large number of anti-war books were written. These books exposed the futility and hollowness of war. And the last, the influence of radio and cinema. In the modern age, radio and cinema show great impact on literature. The radio brought literature into the home, and it opened an entirely new field for authors. Cinema also played an important role. The invention of locomotive and telegraph, rapid and cheap intercommunication resulted in an intellectual revolution. Printing was multiplied and cheapened. Next, about the literature in this era. First, Poetry. Modern English poetry is a sort of revolution against the traditional thought and types of the Victorian era poetry. In the first half of the 20th century, there was a change in English poetic outlook. The romantic tradition of the previous age was rejected. The poet was no longer a singer of beautiful dreams expressing himself in sweet words. The poet had to express the chaos and the changing scenery of life and society around the readers. Next, the prose. Prose has remarkably developed in the 20th century. The modern writer aims at achieving simplicity and clarity of expression and carefully avoid all literary artifices impeding their flow of thought. The written language of today is much nearer the spoken language than it ever was before. Next, the characteristic of novel in this era. Modern novel is remarkable for its popularity, variety, and complexity. Novels are being written practically on all possible themes and subjects. The modern novel is realistic. It deals with all the fake of contemporary life, the pleasant as well as the unpleasant, the beautiful as well as the ugly, and does not present merely a one-sided view of life. And life is presented with detached, accurate, regardless of morals or ideological consideration. Next, individualism. In modernist literature, the individual is more interesting than society. Specifically, modernist writers were fascinated with how the individual adapts to the changing world, and in some cases, the individual triumph over obstacles. For the most part, modernist literature features characters who just keep their heads above water. Writers presented the world or society as a challenge to the integrity of their characters. The last is symbolism. The modernist writers infuse objects, people, place, and events with significant meanings. They imagine a reality with multiple layers, many of them hidden or in a sort of code. The idea of a poem is The idea of a poem as a riddle to be cracked had its beginning in the modern period. Symbolism was not a new concept in literature, but the modernist particular use of symbol was an innovation. And the last discussion is about the famous authors. There are some famous authors in the modernism age. First, T.S. Eliot. Eliot is the greatest poet of the 20th century. His influence has been immense on English poetry. He was awarded Nobel Prize for Literature and Order of Merit in 1948. And one of his best work is The Wasteland. The Wasteland is considered one of the most important poetic documents of the age. Next, James Joyce. James Joyce is one of the greatest novelists of the 20th century. He is one of the chief exponents of the stream consciousness technique in English novel. Joyce brought a number of changes in the conventional forms of fiction by generating a unique medium of art. And one of his best work, there are Dubliners, the novels portrait of the artist as a young man, and the last is Finnegan's Wake. So that's all from explanation. Sorry if I have any mistake when I explain the materials, and thank you for watching my video and have a nice day.